Mr. Henry to do some political maneuvering.
Oh, Mr. Henry, my great concern about that, Mr. Mason, is that, well, the bill itself, well written by Mr. Henry, of course, but Mr. Henry himself, I have some concerns.
You need not have concerns about Mr. Henry. It's not him. I quite appreciate, I respect the gentleman. It is, however, that opportunity that assessment bill opened up.
Yeah.
It too easily could have turned into a religious aristocracy here in Virginia.
My concern exactly about Mr. Henry. He has some idea of placing some central church or even the bishop he spoke of.
It would be to reestablish the church as we knew it some 10 years ago. And Gowan, it seems as though we have some company now here with us. I apologize. We have been arguing over this subject for the better part of 10 years.
Yeah, well, at least 1776 we started it.
Yes. I believe when I formally knew you. Allow me a proper introduction. I'm Colonel George Mason of Gunston Hall, Fairfax County. I was making my way down here to the new capital of Richmond and stumbled here into Osborne's Tavern, where I found a familiar face.
The Reverend Gowan Pamphlet's my name. Of course, co-founder of the First Baptist Church in Williamsburg, the only Baptist church in Williamsburg.
That is when I first knew of Gowan. It was over 10 years ago when you were ordained, if I'm not mistaken, as the first slave Baptist preacher.
Yeah, well, actually now I've come to find out 10 years later that I'm the only black preacher ever ordained in this country.
Amazing.
Yes.
Anyways, you can understand why I was curious. Well, I found myself, and I say 10 years ago because that's when I was in the capital city. Once it became known that I was the principal author of that Declaration of Rights that Virginia ratified, everyone wished to bend my ear about some article or section.
Well, Mr. Mason, especially that Article 16.
Yes, certainly.
Of your Virginia Bill of Rights. If you remember the concern I brought.
Oh, yes.
Very fact.
If we might bring those who are now with us.
Oh, yes.
We've been arguing this for some time. You may be unfamiliar. However, it was 10 years ago, in the summer of 1776, after Virginia sent a representative to Philadelphia to vote upon independency, we created a Bill of Rights and a Constitution here. That last article, the one which Gowan was just referencing, was the one concerning religion. That religion, or the duty that we owe to our Creator, and the manner of discharging it may be governed only by reason and conviction, never force or violence, and therefore all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion.
Ah, well, exactly, sir. And you know what happened? Once that idea of the introduction of that Article 16, all dissenters, especially Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Quakers, Dunkers, and all the rest, well, they thought that article gave them the permission to come out into the public, bring their congregations, and everyone now can exercise their rights freely to preach. I even thought that, sir.
And that was the problem. It wasn't that it made everything legal. It made it simply not illegal anymore. We were lost there for a time where we were in purgatory, neither here nor there, neither established church or a disestablished church. Thus, as the quagmire other dissenters like Gowan found themselves in.
Well, the hierarchy of Great Britain, especially the king and the Bishop of London, the Bishop of Canterbury, they have all set forth the authority that there will be only one church, one denomination that legally could represent the people of England. But now, sir, things have changed. Thank the Lord. The day of Jubilee has finally come.
That's right. Well, keep in mind, for a time there we declared these rights, but for a man to truly be free, mind, body, heart, and soul, they must worship as they see fit. That was the belief here. However, merely because that 16th article stated it, it didn't actually change the situation here in Virginia. In fact, it was just the next year that I was appointed to a committee charged with the revision of laws, Mr. Wythe, Mr. Jefferson, Monticello, Edmund Pendleton, Thomas Ludwell Lee, and myself, 5 of us appointed to that committee charged with the revision of laws. It was the 82nd that Mr. Jefferson wrote.
Yes.
I retired myself. As being no lawyer myself, I found no great expertise in it. However, he wrote a majority of them, with great assistance from Mr. Wythe of that city of Williamsburg as well. The 82nd, that was a bill to disestablish the church and truly see religious freedom realized here in Virginia.
Amen. And we couldn't have gotten enough and it come too soon, sir.
Well, it did take some time. It wasn't even presented until 79, and here it was only passed in this January of 1786. And I think it is in no small part, and this is exactly what we were arguing upon your arrival, was the assessment bill.
Oh, yes. Again, that bill, sir, I have no great concern about how Mr. Henry put it together. Patrick Henry it is that wrote it. But Mr. Henry himself, I have great concern. And that great concern, sir, is the very fact that I just don't think we need another established church here in the United States of America, and definitely don't need another bishop here to direct our path as, well, individual preachers of our own denominations, and we're able to control our own destination.
What if they were to offer you to be the bishop of said church, Gowan?
I would think that would be too much of a headache. So every man must know his limitations.
I don't think they're about to ask a Baptist anyways.
Well, that's true. They would know that they would be in long meetings and, of course, have long sermons. And I don't mind talking about that either. But either way, sir, I want to get back to the very fact. I need some clarity on the what is it called now? The Virginia Statutes of Religious Freedom.
Yes.
That bill itself has now given all denominations the right to exercise their religion, of course, in their denomination. We now, in the United States, have the freedom to choose our own denomination, not be told how to worship and who to worship. But my question is now, with this bill also, we as dissenters who have never had the right to have legal marriages, now, sir, we are able to marry legally anyone in, of course, our congregation. And as you well know, most of my congregation are enslaved people. And so I do not think that right goes to my right to be able to marry any of my enslaved people legally.
Well, you must understand, Gowan, I don't think it's this new law that will either bolster you or stand in your way, but that first article of the Declaration of Rights, not as I wrote it, but as it was ultimately modified, that all of the rights promised thereafter were guaranteed only to those who are members of society.
Oh, I remember that statement in 76 when you told me that. It brought me to my knees just about, sir. But of course, at the time I did come back with the query of the Onesimus in the book of Philemon, and how Onesimus himself had been a slave of the house of Philemon, and how the Apostle Paul himself found Onesimus into his cell in Rome and set him free by becoming a Christian, and Onesimus sent back to the house, and with a letter from the Apostle Paul saying to Philemon that Onesimus, the slave, now needs to be free since he now knows the gospel.
Yes. I remember you would tell the story and parable of Onesimus and Philemon to me at no end, yes. However, well, frankly, we have seen laws change. That which was understood in 76 has changed since the end of the war. But we must also recognize much is still changing, and many have questions, not just you. Gowan, I'm afraid I can't speak to whether or not marriages slaves will be legal from here on out, but I also imagine our friends here have a great many questions, and we're not just here to converse with one another, though we can do that at great length. Instead, perhaps we ought turn it over, see whatever questions they may have for you, for me, of our current circumstances.
Well, absolutely, sir. We want to know what the public is thinking, sir.
Wonderful. Do you have any questions there for us, Mr. Smith?
We do, friends. Our first question is, about you two. Now, we understand that neither of you fought with a musket or fought with a bayonet during this most recent Revolutionary War. You didn't secure this thing through the spilling of blood, but you did secure it through some spilling of ink and words. Can you talk a little bit about what you won in this revolution?
Oh, certainly, certainly. I should be happy to first admit that due to the gout that I've had since, my late 20s, I've never had a great talent for marching or anything of that nature, and frankly, lest the enemy is a pack of slow-moving deer, I have no talents with a musket either. No, if I held any talents, and it was this that I contributed, it was words, it was inspiration, it was ink, as you say. I am a man that realizes my talents and where they find their ends. I would not have done any well to organize troops. However, it was my hope that words, frank words, obvious words, I'm not a lawyer who gets lost in Latin legal terms. I'm a man who speaks frankly, apparently, sometimes to my own detriment, or at least the detriment of my popularity, and I am all that much happier for it. However, I have also seen here since this war, great things have been accomplished. Just now, as we've seen this new law, seeing that this church is truly disestablished, we see that we have finally arrived at some of those dreams, some of those goals set out in our Virginia Declaration of Rights, some of those promises made during the Revolution, we now see enacted around us.
Well, sir, I had two documents, especially the Bible, King James Bible, 1611 edition, that I've had ever since. Well, one of my Christmas boxes was full with this Bible. I asked Mrs. Vole, sir, she passed away. God rest her soul.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
So sorry to lose her. But and of course, this copy of Mr. Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Two documents that I used. I might not have had a musket or a cannon to fire, but I had these two, which I would say even more powerful than a musket and a cannon, the Bible and, of course, Common Sense by Mr. Thomas Paine. This alone, this pamphlet alone, I should say, not only the reason I named myself Pamphlet, but also because of this pamphlet, many of those in the Continental Army were recruited by the reading of this pamphlet during 1776 through 1781, the Battle of Yorktown. About 500,000 copies of this pamphlet had been sold and has been read to many of the people in the colonies. And so these are sort of my weapons of choice. And of course, I think it really did help people to understand that we had certain ideals that we fought for in the war, and that's liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. And I would say those rights that many people did not even know they had until Mr. Paine wrote it in Common Sense, and of course later on with the Declaration of Independence by Mr. Thomas Jefferson, it talks about the very fact that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I would say with those rights guaranteed by God Himself, that everyone should be able to enjoy now these rights and sit down at the table of feast to feast off those ideas.
Other curiosities or questions?
Thank you, Reverend Pamphlet. I have a sort of a follow-up question for that last statement that you just made. You talked of rights and you talked of attempting to secure them. Did the Revolutionary War secure these rights for you?
Well, I would say not completely, sir. The whole idea of the basic ideas of the natural rights given by God of freedom, liberty, equality, and justice should have been given at the end and winning of that war to everyone, no matter the color of their skin, now the United States of America. But we have seen that it's still a query, it's still a question, if everyone will be able to enjoy and feast off of those ideas. I would say that we all are endowed by these rights, but now will the government, or even our new government now, allow those rights to be exercised by those enslaved, those Indians, well, even the Irish question sometimes if they have the rights in this country to exercise those natural rights. So I have not fully received it in full, sir, but I would say that I have it in my soul by God.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mason, speaking of this topic of rights for all people, what are your opinions on a certain sect of society that has been denied those rights for several generations on this continent? Specifically, what are your opinions of slavery, sir?
Every gentleman here is born a petty tyrant, practiced in acts of despotism and cruelty. We have become callous to the dictates of humanity, to the finer feelings of the soul, taught to disregard a portion of our own species in the most abject form below us. Every liberal, every generous sentiment, if not entirely extinguished, is at least enfeebled in our minds. And is this the world in which we are to educate our future leaders and legislatures? No, the laws of impartial providence may, even by such means as these, deliver upon our posterity an injustice, an injury done by our own injustice to a people that we have kept below ourselves. No, this cruel and curious institution is one that diminishes the minds and the morals of our people. Now, that being said, we must see correction to it. Otherwise, an inevitable chain of cause and effect means that as countries cannot be punished or rewarded in the next lifetime as you or I certainly shall be, they will meet their ends upon this globe. And a chain of inevitable cause and effect means that national sins will be met by national calamities. That being said, I am not blind to the looking glass in my own hypocrisy, for I include myself when I mean that every man is born a petty tyrant. I still own people that I inherited, or at least I inherited their parents when I was 9 years old. I have not found a solution to this problem, but it is undeniably wretched. Another question, please.
Thank you. We have a question from Erin, and she would like to know when you two first met. I know this is a shift away from this topic we're currently on, but we very well might get back to that topic again. Erin wants to know when you two met, how you met.
Well, it's been some years ago, I believe, in the late 1760s,
Yes.
68, 69, at the tavern in which I had, of course, been enslaved and, of course, worked and been owned by Mrs. Jane Vogue, the King's Arms Tavern in Williamsburg, right on the Duke of Gloucester Street. I think that was the first time
Yes,
you come through the door, sir.
I live in Fairfax County, as I said, but there was a time in the early 60s when I was serving as a Burgess. At that time that Gowan references, I was serving as treasurer for the Ohio Company, a land speculation company looking to settle the lands out west along the Kanawha River. And so that would bring me sometimes here to the capital city, and sometimes I would stay at King's Arms. But I must say, Gowan, at least for my memory, certainly you came into significance after hearing of your ordination.
Oh, yes, yeah, well, my ordination. 1772, I had the pleasure and privilege, with permission by Mrs. Vogue, my owner, to be ordained in 1772. Of course, I had at my ordination, which was held across the river of the James, the county or the parish of Surrey. In fact, as a matter of fact, not too far from the place you disembark from that into that parish, right down the road on a plantation of a very famous revolutionary. His name is Mr. Nathaniel Bacon, and they call it Mr. Nathaniel Bacon's Castle. That's where I was ordained, which, of course, now many have said quite apt. Gowan, you were ordained on the plantation of a revolutionary, since you, Gowan, are a revolutionary.
True enough. Are there other curiosities or questions?
Can we talk a bit about your families? Can you give us an insight as to your most recent events within your family? Where did you come from? And describe to us your domestic life.
Yes. I must admit it was not terribly long after you were ordained that I lost my first wife, my dear
I
Anne.
heard about that. My condolences again, sir.
Thank you. Well, it had been some years. I did not think that I would ever recover. I had 9 children that she left behind, which kept my life very busy. Our eldest daughter, Nancy, she took over the management of the household. She stepped in and demonstrated a maturity and a responsibility well beyond her 15 years, and so she ran the household. My eldest son was acting as a state garrison ensign during the war, at least for the first half, until his health followed in the ways of mine. However, it were some years ago, I don't know if we've had a chance to speak of this, that I had returned home, and I had noticed all of the young folk had set about providing bedfellows for one another. I had signed so many marriage licenses since I had returned. I asked a friend if he knew where to find a good one for myself, for I find cold sheets extremely disagreeable. Not too surprisingly, I ultimately would remarry Gowan.
Yes.
I remarried some 5 years ago to a woman who I'd long known. We had long been friends, 5 years my younger. She had never been married herself. Are you familiar with the Brents?
The Brents. The family of the Brents that I know, sir, they're Catholic?
Yes, one and the same.
Oh. Well, congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
Yes.
George Brent, yes.
Yes.
I've known her father for some time when we were younger men, but known Sarah for some time. But yes, the Brents, self-same, the Papists, as you say.
Well, it's a new day, sir. It's a new day. Everyone now is included in the worshiping of God in their own particular way. So congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome, sir. Yeah. Well, as to my family, I am not married anyone here as my wife, or do not have children at this particular point in my life. I do now pastor a church of over now 400 members in Williamsburg, and of course that really takes quite a bit of my time in seeing my members. My members are like my family. The children in my church are like my own children, and I do spend a lot of time in nurturing them, because I do believe that the church is more than just a building that people should attend or at a certain time of the week or a certain time of the month or the year. I think a church is actually more powerful than that in a community. I think the church is like a hospital, sort of like the hospital that's right across the street from where I hope that my church would move one day, right on Francis Street and Nassau Street. I hope in negotiation and some talks about having that as my next location of my the church now, 400 members. I think the church is more like a hospital, because for the church, it is a place to come for the healing of the soul, and also for the understanding of who you are in society. And I think the church answers that question more than anyone else or any place else. And plus, I think the healing is even a more permanent healing of the soul than one that might go to a doctor and be applied to medicines that doctor might give them. I think the church need to be sort of that light upon the hill, shining into the darkness, and of course into the souls of the people within that community.
Thank you, Reverend Pamphlet. This is perhaps the most salient, one of the most salient points that you could have made, and that is about healing. Mankind will always find themselves in a bit of darkness and in need of a bit of light, which both of you, sirs, provide. We're going to, in a moment, switch tacks pretty hard, and I'm going to ask you to take your hats off and step into a different man's skin. But before we get there, I want to propose one final question for this in-character portion, and that is from Violet. And Violet would like to know about you, Reverend Pamphlet, specifically your freedom. Are you freed?
Violet, I'm not freed fully at this particular point, although I have just had my owner, Mrs. Jane Vogue, to pass away, and upon her deathbed, she told her son, David Miller, that I was to be free. The first time I've ever heard that
Really now?
spoken by her or David Miller himself, and so I would say that question is quite timely. In fact, we have been in some discussion about when that will be. In fact, Mr. Miller himself have given me the choice as to that time that I would want to be free, since his mother had given him that duty. And so I would soon be free, but I take that with the blessing that comes with freedom, liberty, equality, and justice. But I also know that the institution of slavery has to end. My hope was that the institution of slavery would have gone away after the war was won in 1781 and the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. I thought sure that this institution would have been ended, but it has not. But it doesn't. Well, we won't give up hope, and we won't give up the very fact that one day I do believe it will end. It has to end, especially in a country that have the ideas of this country: liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. And as the Declaration said, that we must be able to pursue our happiness. And there's no way anyone can pursue happiness in chains. So we're never going to give up on the idea of ending this institution. I think the winning of the war in 1776, and now that we're all here, Americans, and now able to put our stake in the ground, that right and those liberties have to be extended to everybody, no matter the color of their skin, no matter how high or low are they in society. We must be able to enjoy the fruits of this victory now against, I would say, a more oppressive government, and that was Great Britain.
Friends at home, we have an opportunity now to discuss not just with the two men that you see before you as George Mason and Reverend Gowan Pamphlet, but also the men who interpret those people. They are, in order, Josie Arco, who interprets George Mason, and James Ingram, who interprets the Reverend Gowan Pamphlet. We encourage your questions now to talk not just about Gowan Pamphlet and George Mason, but also about the work that goes into this thing. We are existing in an uncertain time in this nation, and what better time than with uncertainty to reach back to find a stronger footing. So with that, we are turning the conversation back over to you, sir, not as George Mason, but rather as Josie Arco. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Good to be here, Mr. Smith. We wanted to take a moment as we enter here into the month of June, where we're going to see discussion about race and relations in the 18th century, and really take an opportunity to take the wig off, to take the hat off, figuratively, if not literally, because we find ourselves very much, as you put, in uncertain times here at present. And wanted to have an honest conversation, and one that's easier to have, I think, sometimes when you can provide that full context. As was said, we find ourselves in unprecedented times where people fight to be heard, others struggle to understand, and many are uncertain about the future. And while I don't know what will happen in the future, I do know the past. That is what we do here. Knowing our past knowing our history is absolutely vital. It can provide context. It can give understanding to people, even in a modern day. Here at Colonial Williamsburg, we have always had the hard conversations, race and religion.
Yes.
Where this was born out of freedom and equality, these ideas of oppression and justice. We've had these conversations, and not just now, not just this month, but for many, many years. And we haven't always gotten it right. We're constantly learning. And that's why people, we hope, come here. And that's why people, we hope, ask us those hard questions. So we encourage you to listen, to learn, to research, to grow, whether it's in your homes, whether it's when you come back to us here, whether it's in your communities. We have these conversations. And if there's one consistent thing, and I think James just absolutely nailed it, it is that idea of hope. If there was one thing that was consistent about these people of a revolutionary period, it was that all of them, man, woman, or child, black or white, free or oppressed, famous or forgotten, they wanted to leave a better future for their children a better tomorrow than the today they have known. And I think that is something that all of us absolutely can get behind.
Amen. If I can say it again.
Absolutely.
So used to saying that anyway. But anyway, I do believe what Joe said is absolutely correct. And I want you to know that we are very aware of what's going on in our country today. And it's quite a struggle for us to figure out how to come up with the right words at the right time and with the right people. We are always working to perfect our teaching and our understanding of the history of the past because it is a history that the future can learn from, and we want to leave that for that future to be able to take up and to use for themselves. Our country is going through quite a struggle right now, and of course, those very ideas I talked about the rights, those natural rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness and liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. Those are precious rights. They're very much, I would say, in jeopardy all the time, and especially around different countries that do not like the very fact that we have those rights, and we're always trying to fight to make it something that everyone can enjoy in this country. Now, it comes with a struggle sometimes. Frederick Douglass, as you probably well know, great historian and great civil rights leader of the 19th century, said something I think pretty clear, pretty powerful, is that power does not conceive their power unless you struggle with that power. I think that's a word for the day because we're struggling now in different parts of our country and I would say the world that we may all be able to enjoy those natural rights that we talked about, and especially what I've heard repeatedly in those rights are equality and justice. And I think those two rights need to be focused on. In our Pledge of Allegiance, we were talking about freedom and justice for all as part of the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America's flag. And we talk about this rights to be able to exercise our duty, to be able to use those Bill of Rights or those natural rights that we have been now given with even the Constitution of the United States to be able to speak freely of these. I think we need to understand how important and how much blood was shed upon the battlefields from Bunker Hill to Yorktown, and to continuously shed in all the wars we have fought up to now, that we all should be able to enjoy these rights without having such a struggle. As that symbol for justice is the goddess Justina, Greek goddess. If you notice that goddess is blindfolded, and is supposed to be a symbol that no one will be treated any differently, no matter how rich or how poor, how high or how low, that you'll be given those rights and treated equally. Now, we know we have not always been successful in that in this country. And those that need to be held accountable to make it even more of success need to be held accountable. And that struggle continues. But I would do believe we reach a day, and will reach a day, where we will have all those rights and freedoms extended to everyone on an equal basis. And until we're able to reach that point, we still got a lot of work to do.
But it will be a day of Jubilee, right?
Day of Jubilee! And we can shout until the victory comes.
So are there any questions for us? We can, of course, find Gowan and Colonel Mason very easily again if they need to answer, but we're also happy to speak as the interpreters and historians as well.
Oh, absolutely. What are your questions?
Sure. So, James, this question goes back to you, and you were talking about struggle. And I'm sure the struggle, you were talking about it in grand terms of the struggle of a nation and a people moving forward, but there's probably also an internal struggle that has been a part of this job. And Ashley would like to know, do you ever get treated negatively because you portray an enslaved person?
Ashley, what a question. Nice question. I've never been treated, I would say, badly by anyone, or definitely not on purpose. People sometimes. Slavery and the whole subject of bondage and freedom is a very difficult subject to talk about to anyone. And so sometimes people in their questions do get sort of tangled up in their words, and maybe something might come out not so clear. And what my job is basically is try to hear that question and to get them to redefine what they meant in that question, and I can help them formulate that question a little bit better, and that way that person can get a better understanding. So, but personally, I know I've never been attacked or called any kind of name out of order, or in fact, for my now over 25 years of being here, I've found it quite a job that is not only needed in this country now, and even before now, even in the future, this kind of teaching, I think, is a means of us coming to an understanding of what it is to be able to enjoy these freedoms and to be an American here, even in the 21st century. Yeah.
Thank you, James. We're going to pop over to you, Joe. And James just mentioned how many years he'd worked for the foundation. 25, is that right, James?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We had a question from Violet who wanted to know how long you had both been working. So, Joe, we're going to get to a deeper question, but first, how long have you been with the foundation?
I started in 2007, fall of 2007, so I've been here 13 years, not always as Mr. Mason. I actually left for a short time to work at a museum up in Fredericksburg, wonderful, and recommend Ferry Farm in Kenmore if you haven't been. But I came back in the role of George Mason 4 years ago. So been wearing, not this actual wig for 4 years, but this figurative wig for 4 years.
It has been cleaned.
Yes, it has been cleaned.
Many times.
So Ashley had asked another question on top of James' question about portraying an enslaved person. But this question is for you, Joe, and Ashley wants to know, how does Joe feel about portraying a slaveholder? And then she adds an addendum, even while that slaveholder speaks and preaches of equality.
Yes. No one is more frustrated with the people we portray than ourselves. We spend the most time with them. I venture to say that because we spend so much time with them, they can really get on our nerves, but it's very much like family. You love them the most, they frustrate you the most frequently. So how do I feel about it? It is a story that is important to get out there. So I am honored and burdened and frustrated by it sometimes. I have wonderful conversations with people. I can think back to a couple that I was speaking with in character at the Raleigh Tavern maybe about 2 years ago. And the man asked me, an older black man asked me, how you could justify it, how you could convince yourself. And every way I answered him, he kind of said, sounds like you're using a whole bunch of words and not really saying much. And I was thankful afterwards. I was able to break character a little bit and say, thank you, that's great. Those are what we're here for these conversations. Please also know that those aren't Joe's thoughts, those aren't Joe's feelings. So it is, I do think, a charge. It's something just like in a similar manner, I imagine, portraying an enslaved person, it comes with a certain responsibility because you have to navigate how do you portray someone of the past accurately to them without also confirming modern racism and prejudices. So it's a challenge, certainly, but it's one that I will sometimes say happy, but happy isn't quite the right word, but proud to take to try and just execute. rambling in there. I apologize, Ashley.
No, that's all right. That's why we memorize our people's quotes.
Absolutely. And again, I want to say it out of character. When asked about the opinions of slavery, it's not a direct quote. I had to move some things around, and they come from different sources, but most of that was Mason's words, and yet frustratingly does not free any of his slaves. That's not my choice, but I have to answer for it.
And you feel okay about that, Joe? Sometimes changing the quote in some form or fashion?
I think that always going back to the original material is best, but we also recognize that if we took it word for word, tenses would be off. You even see that in books. You'll see ellipses to mark for places where quotes have been cut out. I think also always encouraging people to go back and take a look at those words. I go back and look at those words again. But it is our responsibility to not only repeat the history. We're not just here, we're interpreters. We have to interpret that history. We have to present it in a way that you can actually come to that understanding. So I think, yes, sometimes you do have to, you can never forget the source material, but sometimes when you tie it in a way together, it becomes a narrative that people can follow much easier.
We are running very low on time, unfortunately, but I was hoping that maybe we could end with hope. And we've spoken eloquently on the struggle, eloquently on the history and its resonance to today. So I believe it probably right to end with hope. What is your hope for the future? How do we hold on to these rights? And I should say this can come from George Mason, Gowan Pamphlet, or Joe and James Ingram.
I am going to cede the floor, sir. I will leave it to the minister to preach hope for the future.
Yeah, I think I was given that. We only have a few minutes left.
Not a whole
For
sermon.
Baptists, that's
Not
very
a whole
difficult.
sermon, sir.
But anyway, I really want to charge you all, the public, the listening audience. I want to charge you to take those ideals we talked about, not only to learn about them, even in the time before they were actually recognized as rights, and that's liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. And I want you to really study them and to learn why this country would go to war in 1776 over those ideals. And I want you to also think about the very fact of the protection of those rights that hopefully you'll teach your children in the future, or your children now, to teach them about these rights, your fellow friends, some of the students you're going to school with, and some of the people on your job and in your community, to tell them how important it is to protect these rights. They were not easily obtained. Every time we fight a war, and we've fought a lot of wars up to now for the protection of those rights, but not all the time coming from war have we allowed those rights to be enjoyed by some of the same soldiers that have fought in these wars, and some of the people that are living in this country. We still have a responsibility as an American here in this country that everyone should be able to enjoy these rights and protect the rights of liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. So I'm going to just charge you with the few seconds that we have, charge you that you find a way to make sure that the light doesn't go out, that these rights will be here for the future, for the as Joe said, for our children's children. And starts with you right there in this audience today.
If you enjoyed what you saw today, we encourage you, speaking of the future, you can come back. This is just the first of many Juneteenth somewhat celebrations, the discussion of race and relations in our history. We'll have Juneteenth celebrations next week. Our character live feeds will probably, at least in some way, tangentially connect to those ideas, as well as all of our usual programs happening. We have Trades Tuesday still happening, and I encourage you at the end of this week. It is the 12th of June. That is the anniversary of the ratification of the Declaration of Rights. So if you thought there wasn't enough Virginia Declaration of Rights, I think there never is enough. I highly encourage you to tune in on Friday and check that out. Thank you for visiting with us here. I will say bye from Joe and from George. Do you want to say bye?
Well, good day.
Thank you. All of our programming are made possible by the generosity of our donors. Thank you for your support.